G'day traders, welcome back to another Python script lesson. Today's lesson is going to be a pretty interesting one, I think. And here is the question. This trader has written a script where they are trying to print the ATR of the past 10 days, the closing price of the past 10 days, and what percentage the ATR is of those respective closing prices in the form of a table. So far, pretty simple. However, as they say here, everything works perfectly as long as I'm on the daily trading time frame or lower, but the moment I go to a weekly or any time frame higher than the daily time frame, my table shows incorrect data, or data as it's known in Australia. And it's showing incorrect data because it's picking up the wrong resolution. So what we have here is a problem relating to the security function. So as you probably know by now, when we want to reference price data or indicator values from a time frame other than our trading time frame, we typically use the security function, the request.security function. However, that function only works when retrieving higher time frame data. So if we're on a 1 hour chart and we want to get yesterday's daily high and daily low, for example, we can reference yesterday's daily bar on that lower time frame, and we can get that high and low value really easily just using, ignore all this code here for a moment. Normally we would, for example, to get the daily high, we would say request.security, and then we need to pass in the symbol. So we could just pass in our current symbol. Wow, can't type today. Our time frame, so the daily time frame, and the expression would be the bar's high. Now this is just a rough example. There's some more code we need to add in order to help with repainting and so on, but you get the idea. Pretty simple. We just get the high from the daily time frame. The problem when referencing lower time frame data, in this student's case, they are on the weekly chart and they want to reference daily bars. The problem with referencing lower time frame data is that instead of just getting one value, there are between 5 to 7 days in a trading week. On the stock market, it's typically 5 days, and the market's closed for the weekend. Same with Forex. For crypto, it's typically 7 days, unless there's an exchange outage or maintenance or whatever. So when we're referencing that lower time frame data, we actually have up to 7 values on this weekly time frame, and on a monthly chart, we've got 30 on average days in a month. So that obviously complicates things. But in today's lesson, I'm going to show you a solution I came up with for getting the past 10 days ATR values so that we can perform whatever analysis we want to on that data. And this technique applies to ATR values, price values, open, high, low, close, other indicator values, etc. It should work for any of those requirements. So I've already written the script, obviously. To save time, I'm not going to write out the code again. I'm just going to break down what I've done here. So the source code for this script will be below this video. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the video description. If you're watching in the course, as you know, there is always the source code below the video. So the first thing we are doing, as always, is getting our user input. So for this script, I'm just getting 2 inputs. I'm getting a look back period and a time frame period. So by default, our look back is going to be 10 days. I'm going to, just to keep things simple for this lesson, we're going to focus on getting daily bars on the weekly and monthly timeframes. But this technique should apply to any time frame, which is why I've included a time frame setting. So for example, if I wanted to get 1 hour bars, I could just set that to 1 hour. And so long as we are on a time frame that's above the 1 hour time frame or above, the script will work. If we go below that, the security function for requesting lower time frame data does not work on lower time frames than the reference time frame. For that, you would need to use the regular security function. So those are our 2 user inputs. The second thing I do here is, this is completely optional. You don't need to do this, but I did this because it keeps things simple, more simple later on. So here I'm defining a custom function for safely retrieving array values without an array index out of bound error. So if you're not familiar with arrays, in the course, I have a whole section on arrays. I don't think I've covered it much on YouTube yet. It's not something I personally use a lot in my scripts, but today we're going to use some basic array functionality. The issue with arrays is that they have boundaries or bounds. So this, for example, is our array. I've written it out. The very first element in our array is today's ATR value. So if I hover over the current bar, I'll go down to the daily time frame and hover over this current bar. Bitcoin's not having a great day. The ATR is actually picking up. When I first wrote this out about an hour ago, it was actually 657. Now it's 662. This purple number here is the current ATR on whichever bar I'm hovered over. So I need to change this. 662. That's our very first array element. If we try to reference an array element below 0, so if we passed into our array function a -1 index, we would get an array index out of bounds error because there is no -1 value. You cannot assign a negative value to an array index. You can only have positive numbers. And the array begins counting at 0. The first element in an array, its index is 0. And so here we have 10 array elements. 9 is the 10th element because we start counting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It gets a little bit confusing, but you get used to it with practice. And basically, we have a 10 element array here. If we were to try to reference the array index 10, which would be the 11th element, we would get an array index out of bounds error because that element does not exist. Our array only has 10 elements. This function allows us to pass in our array and an array index, and regardless of whether that index exists or not, it will not crash our script. Our script will not give out an error because we have two checks here. So we define our custom function, getArrayValue. It has two parameters, our array ID and our array index. And then we use the equals right arrow operator to define the code for this function. And then we check if our array size is greater than our index, then we have a valid array index, and we can just use the array.get function to retrieve this array index's value from this given array. So in this particular case, let's call this array here our ATR values. When I call this function, if I were to pass in my ATR array and an index of 0, then we would get this value here retrieved. If I were to pass in an array index of 20 on this particular set of data or data, sorry, I keep saying data. I know some of you don't like me saying data. It's an Aussie thing. I'm working on it. If we were to pass in an array index of 20, then this function would return NA instead of crashing our script. So that's the purpose of this function. The next thing we do here is we get our expression that we're passing into the security function. So in this particular case, this trader who sent in this question wants to retrieve the ATR value. So I just declare a new expression here, a variable called ATR value equals, and then we use the inbuilt ATR function. This is optional, but for debugging purposes, so that scares me every time. I need to figure out how to turn the volume down on that thing. It nearly blew my eardrums out. I'm just plotting the ATR value here onto the chart for debugging purposes so that I can keep track of what my script is doing. The next thing I do is I get my lower time frame data from the security lower time frame function. So before we continue, I'm going to pull up the documentation for this function so that we can understand exactly how it works. So here is the documentation for requesting data from a lower time frame. So security function, the original request.security function, was designed to request data of a time frame higher than the current chart time frame. So on a 60 minutes chart, this would mean requesting 240 daily, weekly, or any higher time frame. However, if you are on a 60-minute chart and you want to use the data from 1 minute bars, then you need to use this new, it was technically new, but it's been around for several months now. It's new to PineScript version 5, and it's called the request.security_lower_TF for timeframe function. If you were to use the request.security function in our example, the example below, you would actually only get the final minute bar for the last hour. Here it says, this is why we added the request.security lower timeframe function, so you will now receive an array containing all of the minute bars in the last hour. The returned array will contain all of the available intra bars sorted by the timestamp in ascending order. And then they have an example here of requesting 1 minute bars from the current symbol using this new request.security lower timeframe function. So let's jump back over to our charts and see what I've done here. So for our purposes, we want to get the ATR value of our lower timeframes. So we define an array, a float array called LTF for lower timeframe ATR array is set to request.security lower timeframe, and then we pass in the current symbol ID for whatever market we have loaded on our chart. We pass in the period, so the time frame that we want to reference. This is our lower time frame. So in this case, that is the daily chart. And then we pass in our expression that we want to retrieve from this lower time frame in this market, which in this case is our ATR value. This line of code here will get executed on this time frame on this market, and this array will be filled with this data. The next thing we do is define our merged ATR values array. This is where things get a bit confusing, a bit hard to, for me to explain, because there's a lot of moving parts for the rest of the script here. So the problem we have when we're on a weekly time frame is that in this particular case, it's Tuesday here at the moment where I live. And so we only have a couple of days that are contained within this weekly bar, but we need the past 10 days. So I'm only getting Tuesday's ATR value, Monday's ATR value. I believe the weekly bars on TradingView start from Monday. I'm not sure, it could be Sunday, but anyway, the point is we only have a couple of days worth of data on this current weekly bar, which means if we want the past 10 lower time frame daily bars on this weekly chart, we need to reference the previous week's lower time frame data as well. So that's what this block of code here does. The first thing I do is check if we are currently on our trading time frame. So if the current time frame is equal to our lower time frame here, so in this case, if we're on the daily chart, this code here gets executed. And basically all this does is it loops from 0, so from the current bar, it loops from this current bar back to our look back. So in this case, back 10 bars. So we would loop back to bar number 9 right here. So the first loop would start on 0. So this current bar's ATR value gets set to our ATR array. This guy here gets set to I, our loop index. This array's index here, I, gets set to our lower time frame data. So sorry, this isn't an array. This is our ATR value for the current time frame, and we're just using the regular historical operator to set our array values. Let me comment out all of these plots for a moment, because I have a table here drawing out array values to make it easy to see what's going on. So I'm going to comment all of these out, and I'll show you a new feature for the Python script editor while I'm here. If you hit F1 or the command palette and type in comment, and then click add line comment, that will comment all of those lines of code in one go without having to do them individually. Saves a lot of time when you're debugging a script or developing a script. Anyway, here are our array values drawing as a string. And I wonder if I can, let me change the text color really quickly for our cell. Text color equals color dot, let's make it green. That's better. So these values you see on my chart right now are the contents of our ATR array. And because we're on the daily time frame, which is our reference time frame, our lower time frame, we don't need to actually reference any lower time frame data. We just need to reference the current bars on our chart. So that's what this little for loop does. It loops from 0 to our array size -1. So remember, an array starts counting from 0. So if we have an array with 10 elements in it, the 10th index would be 9, not 10. And so we need to subtract 1 from the size. Otherwise, we will loop 1 too many and we'll get some sort of index out of bounds error. So we loop from 0, the current bar, back to our look back period, essentially, because the size of this array is set to our look back period. So this is the same as saying from 0 to look back -1. Either would work. And then we're setting the index of our ATR array value on this loop to the ATR value for that bar using the historical operator. So when this loop gets to 9, the final array element here, 637, that's our blue line here. If I count back 9 bars, 637.76, you can see that purple number there is our ATR. That is the first value in our array. And this value here is the current bar's ATR, which has increased even more. So I need to edit that again. And so this for loop here just sets our array up on the current time frame. And then we reverse the array order. That's why 637, this bar's ATR here, is the first element of our array and not the current bar. The reason I did this is because the next for loop here, which is used on higher time frames. So when the time frame is not equal to our trading time frame or reference time frame, the array order that we get is like this. So today's ATR value is the final element in the array. And so to keep things consistent, I've reversed the array using the array.reverse function. You pass in the array ID to reverse, and this just flips the order of our array. So I know it gets a little bit confusing. This is probably not a necessary step, but for whatever reason, calling array.reverse on this version of our array population breaks our array. We get some weird happenings occurring when I do that, and I haven't had time to figure out why. So it's a little bit confusing that today's bar is the final element in the array and not the first element. But anyway, it shouldn't really matter for the purposes of this student's requirements. So that's how we handle the time frame if it's equal to our reference time frame. If it's not equal, then that means we should be on a higher time frame. If we are on a higher time frame, this code gets executed, and what this code is doing is saying, if the array size of our lower time frame array, if I drop out to a weekly time frame, if whatever bar our script is running on has lower time frame data, or in other words, if the lower time frame array has a size that's greater than 0, then our little for loop here is executed and we populate our array with the lower time frame data. So this is a for loop identical to this one, except that instead of referencing our ATR array, we're referencing our lower time frame array that gets retrieved by the security function. So we loop from 0 to our array size on that lower time frame array. And this is where things are very different to how we just set our values when we're on the actual lower time frame. When we're on the higher time frame, we do things a little bit differently. We use what's called a first in, first out application of our array. So the array.shift function removes an array's first element and also returns its value. Now we don't care what its value is. So if I wanted to, I could say first value equals, and then if we needed to reference that value, we could. In this case, we don't need to, so I don't need to set that to anything. We just want to delete the very first element in our array. And then we want to push or insert a new array element. So this will loop through our lower time frame array data and shift all of our values in the array by deleting the first element and pushing in a new element. And to do that, we use the array.push function. We pass in our ATR array, which is this here, and the value we want to push into this array is our lower time frame array data for the current index, the loop index. And so this just constantly shuffles our array to populate it so that we have all 10 elements. So if we weren't to do this and we were to just simply reference our lower time frame array, we'd only get 2 values in our array because there's only 2 days in the current week. So by doing this with a persistent array, by the way, I didn't mention this, our merged ATR values array is a persistent array. It does not get reset on every new bar in our chart, unlike all of these other values. This saves our lower time frame data across every bar in our chart, and this for loop just constantly updates that array with the elements we require in order to perform whatever analysis it is we need to do on those lower time frame bars. So in this trader's case, the person who sent in this question wants to calculate the current bar's closing price as a percentage of the ATR across the past 10 days on these higher time frames, and then draw them into a table, which we're not going to cover in today's video. I've already covered how to use tables in previous lessons. I'll leave a link below this video to any relevant lessons I've done. If you're in the mastery course, there's a bunch of lessons on how to use tables, especially in the strategy section. But in any case, this is pretty much our script completed. So if I drop down to the daily time frame here and I bring in my text wherever it went, I don't know why this happens every time. It's very annoying. Stay there on my screen, please. If I look at each bar here, keep an eye on this purple number here, which is the current ATR for the bar I'm hovering over. So today's daily bar its ATR value is 669.7, which is what we have here. Yesterday's ATR value is 618, which we have here. So we have 618, then 614, 624, all the way to the 10th bar or the 9th bar index from the current bar, which starts at 0. We have 637. So our array is working properly. If I drop out to the weekly time frame, all these values should stay the same. So drop out to a weekly, get rid of that line. All the values are the same. We are still referencing those daily bars on the weekly time frame. getting those values we need. If I drop out to the monthly time frame, they all stay the same as well. So the script is working. We are getting the past 10 days worth of ATR values on the weekly and monthly time frame, or any time frame for that matter. If I set this to 2 week, should stay the same. So problem solved, at least for crypto markets and most other markets. For some reason, this code doesn't work properly when I load up a stock market. On the weekly time frame, it works. So these are the past 10 daily ATR values for Apple on the daily time frame. You can see these values are all equal. So yesterday was Monday in the US. So Monday's ATR value was 5.44. And the 10th day back was 4.57. Our array elements match that. So it works fine on the weekly time frame. But for some reason, when I drop out to a monthly time frame, these numbers don't work properly. I haven't figured out why yet. That's a problem for another day. So I apologize for stock traders. If you're trying to use this approach on stocks, you're going to need to use some creativity and figure out what's going on until I can figure out myself. And I'll do an update video if I do manage to figure out why this approach doesn't work on Apple. The reason isn't obvious to me. So if you're more experienced at this than I am and you know why my code's not working, please leave a comment below or send me an email explaining why. I would be very grateful for that. We all have weaknesses. I don't know everything about PineScript or mathematics especially. And so this is just a limitation of my brain. I'm at my maximum capacity with this script. And so I apologize. I couldn't figure out how to get this to work on the monthly time frame, but it does work on the weekly time frame at least, and obviously the daily time frame. I didn't try the 2 week. Let's see if that works. It seems to work fine on the 2 week as well. 3 week, 4 week. So it works fine on the 4 week, but not on the monthly, which should technically be 4 weeks. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Could have something to do with time zone differences. I have no idea. Anyway, let's go back to Bitcoin for now to wrap up this video. One thing I'll show you before we do wrap this up is if I can find my text is gone for some reason. That is great. Whatever, it's not important. What I wanted to show you is that these inputs also work. So if I set our look back to 20 days and click OK, we get a lot more values here. We now count all the way to 20 bars back. Now I do have in my notepad next to me, I've lost the first 10 bars values for some reason, but I do have the 10th to 20th bar values. If I click OK, so we have our first 10 values here all the way to 637.76. And then the next 10 values here are these ones here. And I went through and counted them individually. I checked the ATR value for each of these bars to make sure the script is working. And as you can see here, it is. So we have the 10th, which is technically the 11th bar, but it's the 10th array index, is 654, all the way to the 20th or 19th array index, 20th bar, 19th array index. Hopefully you're following along, but this value should be 637, and that's what we have here. So we have successfully written a script that has a variable lookback period, works on any time frame, any lower time frame. So it has to be a lower time frame than the one you have on your chart, or the script won't work. If I drop down to a 4-hour time frame, we get an error here. Time frame passed to the security lower time frame function must be lower than the time frame of the main chart. As long as we're on the same time frame or higher as our reference time frame, this script should work fine. If you wanted to display the past 10 daily bar values into a table, you would need to copy all 10 of these into this if statement, and you'd probably want to set up 10 rows or columns or however you want to set up your table so that you can fill each cell individually with each day's value. And in this trader's case, he just wanted to calculate what the percentage ATR is of the respective closing price. So to do that, we would need to create a second array here, this one here. We would need to call this something like closing price array. We need to copy this line of code and call this lower time frame closing price array. And then this expression would need to be the closing price. And then we would need to copy all of this array code. So because these arrays are the same size, all we really need to do is copy our setting and shifting lines of code, paste in this code here. We need to reverse this array as well. And then we need to copy this. We'll get rid of the duplicate comments and pass in this and this. And now we should have exactly the same thing, but for closing prices as well as the ATR value. So let's save the code and make sure that compiles. There we go. And now just to confirm this works, let's copy the closing price array into our plots. Actually, let's do it down here. This will be a lot quicker. I'll just paste closing price into our table, save the code. Here are our 10 values. I'll lower the look back just temporarily so that we don't have so many values on our chart. And so this value here is our current closing price, which it's hard to read. Oh, this is easier to look at. 19,706. And then the previous day should be 20,593. That's correct, 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 and correct. Drop out to the weekly time frame. These numbers should stay the same, and they do. Monthly time frame. So there we go. We have the past 5 lower time frame daily closing prices as well as their ATR values. And now you can do the math you need to by dividing. In this case, it would be dividing. What do we want to do again? What percentage the ATR is of the respective closing price in the form of a table. So we would divide ATR percent equals ATR array value divided by closing price array. If I set this to string, save that, and let me set this to today's value, which we can do by using the array.size, pass in our closing price array, and subtract 1 off that. That will get the final array element in that array. Can do the same thing here for this array. Save my code. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to math, which is a great thing to admit as a trader. Just goes to show you don't need to be a math genius to be a successful trader, because I certainly am not a math genius and I do pretty well with my trading. So unless I've completely messed this up, the current ATR value is 3.4% of the current price. So 669 is 3% of 19,600. But anyway, that is the end of today's video. I hope you found it interesting and most importantly helpful in your own trading, especially those of you who need to reference lower time frame data in your analysis. So thank you very much for watching. Best of luck with your trading and your coding, and I'll speak with you in the next lesson. Have a great week.